Welcome to Riverstone Rhythms. I'm Savannah Eugen. Sam is missing this week, but he is in the room with us. We have a very special guest, Adriana Howard from Georgia Kids Belong. She has helped Riverstone in the process of becoming foster friendly as a church, which was so exciting for us. And so because it's Adoption Awareness Month, we invited her on here as our very first guest on the podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Very first one.
No pressure.
To share all of her wisdom with us for episode 12.
Wow.
So we hope you guys enjoy and send any questions that you have anytime. All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how you got into the foster care adoption world.
Yeah. So like she said, I'm Adriana Howard. My journey into foster care and into this adoption space started really I don't want to go well, the year was 1987 and I was born. But I felt like as a child, truly, I was called to adoption. I just had a really clear, very clear notion of the fact that that was how I was going to be a parent. And so there was this TV show on the Learning Channel called Adoption Story. Mm-hmm. And I would rush home after school to watch this program that was not made for children. It was just I was not the target demographic for this show. Absolutely not. But it would just highlight a family on their adoption journey. And I was just riveted by that. And I just elementary school, just knew that was what I was being pulled to. I don't know if I had language to God's calling me to it, because I didn't always there wasn't really a concept of God in our home growing up. But I just knew that was my thing. And so I was really pumped when I met my husband and we started dating, that very early on in our conversations about parenting and what that would look like for us, or what we thought of for families or whatever, he said, I really feel like God's calling me to adopt. And I was like, oh, thank goodness, because I also feel like God's calling me to adopt, which is not everyone's feelings. And so I was really relieved to know that he also felt that. And that was something that he had been working through for a long time as well. And so we always had, crafted this notion that adoption is going to be part of our family making. But we really were just I guess what we'll do is we'll have our own children first and then we'll adopt and it'll just be perfect. And so the joke really was on us when we, after being married for 10 years, decided let's start family planning and stuff. Found out that we could not have children biologically. And so, which was a weird, I don't know. It's this is no disrespect to people who have walked through infertility, because it's really, really, it's a really gross club to be a part of. But I remember for that year or so of us trying before we started getting actual medical answers, every month being so conflicted, because I was I just don't feel like it's supposed to be this way. I don't know if I want to be a mom like this.
Yeah.
And feeling immense guilt, because I would have almost this twinge of relief every month when I wasn't pregnant. And also just it was just a really hard year for on multiple levels. And so when we got our answers that that was not going to be something that was available to us, and again, that's not to knock on people that go through that, because it was really hard when we were in it. But it almost felt once we got our answers that was not going to be available to us biologically, that we mourned and we grieved, and it was super, super hard. But it also was just okay, I think a door has just been closed, that I guess we're fine with closing, because in my heart I was I don't know if I ever felt like that was my door anyway.
Yeah.
And so so we just gave ourselves some time to hurt and be mad and shake our fists at God for a little bit, and then jump right into the adoption process. And at that point we thought, I guess if you're going to be a parent, you have to start with a baby. That seems like the thing to do.
Sure.
And so which is funny, because in hindsight, when I was a kid thinking about adoption and the little I understood about foster care, I was just honestly very ill at ease with again, I just was not ever called towards biological motherhood, and I just was not compelled toward that at all. I was like, I just don't understand. Like, I don't want a baby in me. Like, I just like, I think the whole thing is weird. When my mom would have a baby, she'd be like, you want to touch my belly? And I'm like, ew, no. Like, it was just in me to like, for that to never be in me. You know? And so it's just funny, like the way that God works, obviously. But so we started on this domestic infant track. Because again, like, I guess we're supposed to have a baby first. And so we got, you know, all through the process, home study, everything. We had our profile book to show to waiting moms, all that kind of thing. And so we're like done. Like, we're ready to start being presented to mothers, and are super excited about it. And it's like the end of the year, and they're sending out their sort of end of the year summary for all the waiting parents. And they said, just so you know, the nature of this work is that timelines are always shifting. And so I know we said in the beginning it would be 2 to 4 years of a wait. Now we're saying 3 to 5 years, which is wonderful because more mothers are choosing to parent their children. But just so you know, that's like what you're stepping into is a 3 to 5 year wait. And are you guys okay with that? And we were like, absolutely, we're okay with the wait, except for the fact that we just felt like, again, like very ill at ease, like, oh, we just don't feel like this is for us. And it had nothing to do with the wait necessarily. It truly didn't. Like, if we had felt like God was calling us to that, then we would have waited happily. But we just, I don't know, we just like had a conversation, and I specifically felt like very ill at ease. And at that point, I had already been clued into like the foster care system and, you know, sort of other facets of child welfare that I hadn't really dipped my toes into. And so we're trying to make the decision, like, I guess the only decision is like, yes, we commit to a 3 to 5 year wait, or no, we're just not going to be parents. And so I remember I was just like immensely conflicted, and like, I don't know how to talk to Jamie about this. And so I wound up writing him this long letter. And like, in the course of our relationship, it's kind of like how we get our best like arguments out is like, just like, don't say anything, I'm going to go write a letter. And so, which we weren't arguing, but I just like, I don't know how to communicate this.
Yeah.
And so I wrote him this very long letter, and I just said, listen, like, I just feel like God is telling me it's foster care. Not that we're supposed to grow our family through that, but that's the space we're supposed to be involved in. And I'm like willing to like submit to you if you're feeling strongly about something else, but I'm just letting you know this is what I feel like God's telling me. And like, please don't be mad at me. And so the reason being that, you know, they were asking us, like, are you okay with a 3 to 5 year wait for a brand new, shiny baby? And if that had been what the Lord was calling us to, that would have been great. And I think we would have tried our best to wait patiently and happily and, you know, appropriately. But I just thought, I know right now that there are, you know, thousands and thousands of kids in the system who have already been approved for adoption. Their parents' parental rights have been terminated, and they have been waiting and waiting and waiting for years, 3 to 5 years, for parents to come see them, you know, to pluck them out of just the mass of children and say, like, I choose you. And I just said, I don't feel right about waiting when there's already kids who are waiting. And so I think we need to shift, and we need to consider waiting children. Wow. And specifically like older children and siblings that are statistically way less likely to be placed. And so he read it, and I like, you know, like, this is going to work out. And he just folded it up, and he was like, that feels like Jesus to me. I'm on board. Oh, like, really just that abruptly.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, really that abruptly. And so he's just like, that feels like Jesus. Let's do it. And so, which again, I'm just like, I'm very thankful that like the trajectory of our story is that like, there's just a lot of like synchronicity that happens so that neither of us are having to like strong arm the other into these like bizarre things that we do with our lives. And so we broke up with our adoption agency. We jumped right back into a whole other, you know, process of being home studied and approved, all those different things. You know, became licensed as foster parents. And so that was sort of our journey stepping into this space. And we did not have a sense about what it was, truly a sense about what it was going to require of us, and then how it might take off in like a more professional capacity, which is really cool. But I can see like from 30,000 feet, that like the groundwork was always there. And like now that we are parents and we have our children, I'm like, holy moly, it was always going to be that way.
Aww.
Like, and it makes so much sense that there was always this unrest just like filtering in whenever we like slightly veered off track. And it's just the goodness of God that he like, kept us. But yeah, that's how we are where we are now.
Yeah. So I have a number of friends who have done either foster care or adoption, and that home study process is very rigorous.
It's grueling.
For anybody who's listening who's going through that or about to, do you have like encouragement, wisdom, any quick nugget for them?
We actually found that the process was it was grueling for sure, but it wasn't awful.
Oh, good.
Which is helpful because we did it back to back.
Yeah.
So apparently we just like love people coming into our home and like deeply analyzing us. But I mean, it really wasn't that bad. It almost seemed like Jamie had said this after our first home study. He said, I almost feel like this is a big test to weed out people who are not committed. Like, which I don't wholly subscribe to that, but like I understand what he meant in that there's just so much just like sign this, do this, call these people, fill this form, check this box, and it's just like this list of like to-dos, and it almost did feel like the test is like if you can actually follow directions, if you can like solve a problem, if you can hit a deadline, if you can like then you probably are the kind of people who can like when push comes to shove parent a child with a background of trauma. So they're not like, one for one, but it did feel like just it's incredibly rigorous. We just really like surrendered ourselves to it, and we're just like, it's a wild ride, man. Like whatever happens. Which, is helpful when you're entering like the adoption foster care space. Like I if I could give some advice, it would be just to like let go. Mm-hmm. And just like let the wind and the waves take you where they will, because they're going to anyway. So you might as well just like let go, so it seems like it's a part of your plan and not that you're just being dragged, but also just like be honest and like really, really just give yourself over to the process. It is bizarre. I mean, a good home study organization or from whatever company, whatever, the home study writers, they're going to ask questions and more questions, and like the questions are deep and they're uncomfortable. It's almost Sozo like in its intensity. And so within like the span of 30 minutes they would ask questions like where do you store like ammunition, and where are your guns, and are your knives locked up, and also are you satisfied with your sex life? And like it was all like in the same thing, and you're like, the gun is there and the knives are there, and I think so, like so it's like they have to like parcel out everything that could potentially be like a barrier to like connection or whatever. So it is deeply invasive, but it's not terrible.
Okay,
just like do it and just be honest and just you're along for the ride.
Good.
Yeah,
thank you.
It's not the worst part of what you're about to get into, I can promise you that.
Such a world there. So you're the community engagement manager, correct, at Georgia Kids Belong. Tell me, what are you doing there personally, and then what is your mission as an organization?
So Georgia Kids Belong is the state chapter of a national organization called America's Kids Belong. It's probably easier to start by saying like what we're not.
Great.
Because we do fit into a really weird space, which is cool because I think our nicheness is helping us to meet a lot of needs.
Yeah.
But we're not a child placing agency, although we do work a lot with kids. We're not DFACS, although we have a lot of connections with DFACS and we work alongside them. We don't license, foster parents, although we do things to support foster parents. Really what we're trying to do is sit in a space in between all those different players and make it easier for everybody to do the work that they're doing and to like come to the table with all the resources that they need to be met. And so our sort of mission is to improve the experiences and outcomes for kids in foster care. Because, the primary goal of foster care is reunification. So we want most of those kids to go home, whether it's with mom or dad. It's just somebody that's like biologically tied to them, or like fictive kin, which is just like a good friend of the family. Like we want them to go home. That's like the optimal outcome for these kids. And then in the cases of like children like mine, who home is not an option for them, then we want, then the trajectory becomes we need to find an adoptive placement. So that way, either way, we want kids to go home, whether it's their biological home or an adoptive home. We want them to go home. But what you do have is a system that's flooded with way too many kids, especially in like your major cities. Way too many kids. Like we are maxed out beyond capacity. And so part of our goal is to like make it easier for people who are interested in foster care to say yes, because they're like, I think I can do this. There's a lot of resources that are available to me that I didn't know that I had. And then if you're DFACS or if you're the CPAs, which are child placing agencies, we want them to be able to feel like they're getting the support that they need. So we're trying to partner with them as seamlessly as we can so that way they feel like they can keep doing this work. The other side is that, we're looking at these children, especially the ones who are, waiting children who have been legally approved for adoption. And we're trying to help to recruit families. And so it's kind of like we're sitting in this weird in-between space, and we're just keeping a close eye on like all these different players and figuring out like, how can we serve you? How can we serve you? How can we serve them? How can you guys talk better? How can you guys feel more, in tune? And so I'm the community engagement manager, and I've been at the role now for a little over a year and a half, I think. And even that's just like wildly cool because, I had been feeling like, I think I want to work in this space. Like now that we're foster parents and then we were adoptive parents, I think I want to work in this space. And I don't know in what capacity, but I suffer from like crippling, like I'm not good at anything and like no one should ever look at me and I'm like a slug. Like that's just like, is just kind of like the background noise of my life. And so one night Jamie was like, let's just try a thought experiment. How about you like map out like what would be the like optimal, just like best kind of job that you can get in this space, and just like make it up and see where the wind takes you. Again, we're just like, and so I wrote out, this like job description and was just like, gosh, this would be so wonderful. And at the time I had been following Georgia Kids Belong. It's a newer organization. It's only been around for like 3 or 4 years. And I've been following them on social media. I knew they were local to Ackworth. I'm in Marietta, so it's like close by. So I knew it's really active in Georgia, which was wild because at that time it only had one staff member. You would think that it was like a booming like mess of people running this organization, and it wasn't. It was one woman. And so then I saw her post a job description, and it was like the thing I had written down. And I was like, Jamie, look at this thing. Isn't it beautiful? And he's like, yeah, you should apply. And I was like, no, because, aforementioned, I'm like a loser and I'm a slug and I can't do anything. And he just was like, babe, like you're being so stupid right now. Like you literally wrote this thing out and like God like made it available to you. So just like do it, just apply and see what happens. And here I am. So, but my role is community engagement, specifically trying to find ways of empowering local communities to figure out like what everybody's sort of unique contribution to the foster care space can be. If you're a business, if you're a faith community, if you're a nonprofit, if you're, a foster parent, like what can we do to like serve all those populations of people and help everybody to feel like they have some vested interest in foster care. The hope being that if more people come to the table with something in their hands that they're willing to give, then these foster parents who come in with the best of intentions and don't make it out of year one because it's so grueling and so hard can maybe sign up for a second year and can say yes to a third year and a fourth year because I'm surrounded by a community that has my back. And so the way that we do that is through an app called Foster Friendly. And it's, the app users are all foster parents across Georgia. So it's a very niche, market, but it's growing like beautifully. And, our goal is to attract and connect with businesses and say like, hey, if a foster parent comes to you and they walk through your doors, like, is there anything that you could offer? Anything, any sort of special deal, any kind of whatever, something that would let them know that like this space is safe.
Yeah.
If you're a faith community of any faith, we want to be able to say like, if you happen to have foster parents, foster families in your congregation, in your parish, in your synagogue, whatever, you have to be able to like offer safety. and not further incur more trauma to a space that's already like just blistering in its, in its pain points. It's just a really rough space. So, trauma training your staff is really important, or like offering consistent ministry, community support, even like the way that you talk about foster care or trauma. And can we help to inform all those things? And then by virtue of doing that, if you're a business that can offer something, if you're a faith community that says yes to these things, then we list you as foster friendly. We add you to the app. And if I'm a foster parent, I can open it up. I can see within 100 miles of me, where are all the listings? And so it's like it's a directory of care. It's like, oh my gosh, I can go to this place for a free pizza on Tuesdays. Great. And I can take my kids here to get their haircuts for half off. Awesome. This church has a parents' night out. We're signing up. This nonprofit's, has a clothing closet. Beautiful. And so it's like trying to make all those things available, but then also create more avenues for resources.
Yeah.
And so it's really cool work, and it's really exciting, especially like in the business sphere, to be able to contact people and see them like, I just did not know I could even get involved in foster care. I'm like a donut shop.
Yeah.
And it's like, but you know what? Kids love donuts.
Everyone loves donuts.
So yeah, we all love donuts. And so it's just really cool to see like the movement that's been happening. And it's bled into now foster friendly communities at large, where these cities and their mayors are saying, actually, I want my whole city to be foster friendly. So can we figure out what that means? Which has been super cool. And so we've got, multiple cities that we're working in right now, with like several down the pipeline that have asked, and like words getting out, which is really cool. Like, we're not having to recruit cities to be interested. I think they're understanding like this is a population of people that are vastly underserved, and who are meeting a very real community need. And if you cannot figure out how to like keep these people happy, then there's nothing here for them. Like they have to be able to have their needs met. And these kids have to be able to have their needs met. And if no one's stepping up to the plate, then everyone's unhappy. DFACS is unhappy, and the foster parents are unhappy. The kids are unhappy. The bio families are unhappy. Like that's untenable. Like that's such a hard space for all those players to be in. So now we've got whole cities that are rising up and saying, like, on a government level, like, what can we do? We're gonna start recruiting, like, as a city. We're gonna start hosting recruitment. We're trying to figure out how we can get into schools and figure out, like, could after school programs be made trauma aware? Can whole schools be made trauma aware? Can we figure out how to partner better with the police department? So we're like asking these questions and learning as we go, because the mayor of Ackworth said, like, well, could a whole city be foster friendly? I want to do that. And we were like, yes. We have to define that, though, as we go.
Yeah.
We don't have an answer, but like, we're going to do it.
We will take a step.
Yes. And so it's just been really, really cool. And to be able to see immediately like the impact. We've got families writing all the time just to say, like, man, I took my kids to this like Chick-fil-A that's free every Monday for foster families. Oh. And like, that's incredible. And like, and I take my kids to this place, and it's free for oil changes for foster parents, because they know that I'm transporting kids to doctor's offices and, therapists and visits and all these different things. And so it's just like a community rallying around foster parents, and more importantly rallying around kids in care. It's incredible.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna totally puff you up for a second. You did our trauma training for Riverstone, and I've done like trauma trainings at the graduate and undergraduate level for school, and yours was like exceptional. I was like, I want to sit through that every day. It was so good, educational, informative, and really engaging. And I remember it affected our staff so greatly, where afterwards, like, of course, it was foster focused, but it was like, oh, that's why the person who comes to my office and behaves that way is behaving that way. Totally. And it just opened our eyes to have so much more compassion for people who have endured so much harder things than many of us have. And so definitely would recommend for anyone to get that trauma training if they can. And then I remember you also teaching me just about, as a teaching pastor, being aware of like the examples we use and the impact of our stories of coming from great Christian families and homes, and how someone might feel disqualified if they're hearing that coming from some kind of more broken family system. And so I love that. And so I would love to hear your thoughts for what would you like to say to like the Big C Church about awareness or trauma or foster care, anything that you think could be helpful. And then also for individual believers, like not the whole church, but just like, if you love Jesus, here's something. So maybe start with church.
I love doing those trauma trainings, and I just like what you're saying. It's so impactful beyond the scope of like foster care.
Yeah.
Like if you never have a foster parent, cross through the doors of your church, you still are going to be encountering people who have been broken. And like the way that we meet like heart to heart, if it's not sensitive to trauma and hurt, can be really disengaged. It can be really like it can further damage, even with the best of intentions. Like my husband and I, actually, let me just say, like, you asked earlier about like advice for families. If you're going into this space, I would highly recommend that you find, because it's not standardized, you would think that it would be, I would highly advise that you find like a CPA or somebody that offers, that insists on trauma as part of their training, because that's not everybody. So, which I would not have thought that when we were in our impact classes, and I would have thought that this was like everybody had to go through this stuff. And you don't. And so, and even with all of our trauma training, we were still woefully underprepared because like all that theory goes out the window when you're like sitting in front of a child who is like fundamentally down, like on a cellular level, is like spiraling. Yeah. And you're like, oh, well, that's right. The paragraph on that one book said, okay, so I'm supposed to look you in the eye and like, but, and they're just like, and you're like, okay, I don't know either. I'm crazy too. And so like the idea that like, now that I'm in this space and I'm working and like a part of my job is to provide these trainings, I'm like, man, like the fact that we don't all have like a working understanding of trauma, not as people who have been traumatized, but as like, ministry staff or school staff or hospital staff, like the fact that we are not training everybody on like how you engage people who have been hurt sensitively is like bonkers to me. Yeah. But especially in the church, like that's like my favorite thing that I do at my job is connecting with churches and doing those trainings, which is strange because the content's so heavy. But like I do feel like there's something, at least in the church, when I'm doing those trauma trainings in church, there's the whole thing is laced with hope. Because there's a way back from those things, and it's not even just as simple as like, but God's still good. It's also like, but like if you can encounter people that love you well, like you can hurt people, but also like healed people can heal people, you know? And so there's hope to be found there. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying is so true. Like as far as like the big C church, like it is imperative that we figure out how to be more effective in this space and meet people where they are in the midst of like just grueling, ugly hurt that we don't have words for sometimes. And it doesn't mean that we all have to be, we don't have to all develop like necessarily empathy, because we can't all have gone through those things. Yeah. Like that's the story of humanity, is that it's unfair in different ways. And so not everyone has to go through those things, but certainly coming up with like a language that conveys like sympathy and understanding and like intentionality and strategy is so necessary, because, exactly what you're saying, like, so when I like part of like the whole, just the beauty of like our foster care and adoption journey and the work that I get to do is that, my husband and I come from backgrounds that are incredibly complicated. And there's a lot of trauma in our backgrounds, and it's hard to like be able to disseminate that to my children because it's not for them to know. Mm-hmm. But there are places where like when my kids are hurting that I can say like, listen, I really do get it. Like, and they don't understand that, and it's not for them to know right now, and because some of those people and players are still like in the picture, and we're still having to work through like our own trauma and grief. And so, but it's so beautiful that like God does not waste our pain. Like if we allow him to do something with it, then all those things that maybe weren't even a part of his plan, he can still redeem those things and make them into something of value. And so when I look at my children, and I see like, and I know their history, I know the things that they went through. And the fact that like the Lord knew like we were not going to have children biologically, that it was going to be these kids, and that there's so many parallels between what they went through and what I went through. Mm-hmm. It's just like, it astounds me. And it almost feels like the lessons that we learned and like our experiences with the Lord, like mine, my husband's, would almost have been wasted on children that we would have had biologically, that would have been born like strictly into just like loving homes with parents that were really good at masking, and like covering up all those things. And so, when my kids are going through like really hard moments and they're just like wrestling with just like the things that they've gone through and like, where was God when those things happened? And like, why did that happen to me? And like, it's just so cool that like my heart, like, again, it's that posturing, it's that heart to heart connection. And it's not just because I'm like trauma informed, but because I'm informed by my trauma, that I know how to like sit in that space with them and be able to be present and know, like, I know what they're feeling, and so the trauma stuff is just so important, because it's not going to be everybody's situation. Like what you said is like to be mindful of like, and I remember saying that in the Riverstone training, and I was like, afterwards I thought like, I hope I didn't hurt like anyone's feelings by saying so that but as a means of like illustrating that sometimes those like when someone is presenting a message or teaching or whatever, and is using like their own experiences, beautiful as they were or whole or happy or whatever, it is really hard for me to like I and that's necessary. It's not a bad thing. People like, that's your testimony. Like people should be able to use those things. So I'm not discounting that at all. Right. It is just like that is like my work to do, is to piece out like my own experiences and divorce them from like, my identity now. And I have to actively work against like, so it's part of like why it doesn't always click for me, like because I didn't have parents who like made it so safe and like laid a foundation of like, spiritual sensitivity, and like because like it didn't feel like God was present in my home, and because it was like so does that mean I'm kind of discounted? Like maybe I can't ever like have that sort of experience with the Lord, or maybe I can't. It's like a mountaintop that I'm never going to be able to scale, because like their picks are all like sharper than mine, and mine are just like noodles, and I'm just like trying to scale a mountain and I can't do it. But that's how it feels a lot, And so I'm obviously like mature enough in my thinking that like when those thoughts do come up, I can do the appropriate work with them and piece out what I know is true and what I know is just, the enemy. Yeah. And I can throw that out or save in my pocket for another day when I'm feeling really low. But I think about my kids, I think about my parents, I think about people that went through stuff like I did, or things that I have no idea what they're going through. And like, if they haven't gotten to a place where they can piece out like that truth and that lie and take the good and spit out the bad, like I think that all the time, like whenever I'm anywhere and I'm seeing language or I'm hearing language, I'm constantly aware of like, what is everybody out here hearing, and how are they filtering it through their experiences? Because my experiences were incredibly fraught with ugly things, and it's a wonder that like I was not in the foster care system, that my siblings were not in the foster care system. And so and I love the Lord, and I know who I am in Him, and I'm still like, I think maybe like sometimes like deep down, maybe I still am like just that ugly little child, like I still am that broken kid. And there will be heights that I don't know how I'm never going to be able to reach. And I know those things are not true. And so, I love doing the trauma stuff. And I just think it's so imperative that like, especially for faith communities, man, like if you have people that are coming in every week who's like, bodies are passing through your thresholds, like just expect that there's going to be trauma that like maybe nobody will ever be able to be witness to, and they will never have like the honor of being able to have those things divulged to them as a church, because maybe we haven't created a safe enough space. And if we're not doing that, then like what are we doing? If we're not doing that, if we're not creating safe enough spaces where people can like dump, like physically at an altar, but also like metaphorically in their hearts, that they cannot like recycle all that garbage out and filter it through truth and be able to arrive at new conclusions about who they are and who God is, then like what even are we doing here? That's so good. Yeah. And so I think about that like all the time with my children, and I have to apologize to them on the regular because I'm like, oh, I didn't know that I had anger problems. I didn't know that I was like a spiteful wench. I didn't know that until like I became a parent, because I was so good at like masking and shoving down all these just triggers in me. I'm really good at avoiding conflict because I grew up with it. And so I'm really good at, you know, surviving. I'm really good at surviving in chaos because that's, you know, that's what I had to do. But now my life is a bit chaotic again. And I'm like, oh, what do I do with all these things? And so I want to be able to be like, part of me reaching out to Riverstone was like really selfish because I was like, I'm like grounded here. I don't want to be anywhere else. But I also want to be able to bring my children here and know that they are not going to be like, not even like negatively impacted, but like have like no impact. Like I'm not even saying that people are going to hurt them, but like maybe that the impact will be a little bit nullified because like you're not speaking a language that they can understand. And so part of it was like, I wanted to be foster friendly for my children. And so, yeah, I think it's good work and it's hard and it's not content that anybody wants to hear, but like the message is hope. And if we don't hold those things, then it's like, what are we doing?
Yeah. And I will say it was like a huge answered prayer when you came, because as missions pastor, I've been looking into foster care options for our church to partner with for years since I got the job. And I inherited that. Like when I got the job, they were like, and figure out what to do about foster care. Here are 8 different organizations. None of them really work, but just try it. And I was like,
try to solve foster care.
Yeah, I'll get right on that. And then even talking to other churches who have different resources and different people. So I was like, I don't have that either. And then when you came and shared what y'all do, I was like, this is literally perfect. And it's helped our church so much. And we're still in the beginning stages of rolling it out, but it just gives me so much hope for like what our congregation can be like embracing this, because Cobb County especially needs it. We're not in a hot place when it comes to foster care yet. And so being able to be a part of that, I feel like is huge for our church. And I love that you had the courage or boldness or just necessity to be like, please panic, do this. And I think that's great for listeners too. Like you don't have to wait for your pastor to say like, okay, and now we're gonna do this thing that God calls us to do. Like you can do that. And so then when it comes to like individual believers, what would you say to them?
I mean, I think it's much of the same. Like maybe not every individual believer has the, you know, time and wherewithal to like do a deep dive study into trauma, but certainly like there's resources out there. Like you don't have to sit through a trauma training, but just, you know, being open to like awareness and doing some research yourself on like what the impact of trauma is on a person's body and why. I mean, for me, like when we were going through those trauma trainings in our impact classes, and the more that I've had to do this for my job, and I'm learning all the time, I'm like fascinated by it. Like it's like once the doors are open, you can't shut them anymore. And so I'm not satisfied with like what I know now. I have to keep on learning more because it's going to like benefit my children. It's going to benefit my marriage. It's also helped me to navigate my parents and my siblings and like people that are in our little broken sphere. And so, but like if you want to be more effective at just like loving people, I think we walked away from our trauma trainings and we were like, oh my gosh, that's why they do the things that they do. You know, and like, you know, I'm 37 now, I think. And so we became parents 4 years ago. So like, I mean, I was in like my late 20s, early 30s when we got into this whole world, this foster care adoption space. And so for the like, all the years prior to that, I'm just like spinning my wheels trying to like figure out what the heck is up with the people I love most. Like why can't it just like why can't we just like operate the way other people do, and why are these things still happening, and why do these cycles repeat themselves, and why like, and it was just maddening. Like it was maddening. And so I think like just to be able to connect with people like on an individual basis for believers on like just a person to person basis, like this was so helpful because it's so informed, like, oh, that's why like those things are in me, and that's why that is in him, that's why she behaves that way. Like it provided so much context. And like when you're talking about just on a person to person connection ministry, just relating to people, understanding people, having sympathy and empathy, and like the appropriate kind of frustration with people, like if that can be in some way informed by trauma and what it does to a person's brain, what it does to their bodies, why people respond the way that they do, it allows for so much compassion, you know? And like, I love my family. I love my family deeply, probably sometimes to an unhealthy amount. and we are like, I grew up and we were just like, we were a codependent little unit because none of us were good at relationships outside of each other because we hadn't learned how to like relate well to people. I'm trying to be like really careful because like I still love these people and I don't want them to hate me. But we were just very, very close, like for better or for worse. And so I'm really good at, in a lot of ways, at loving them. But I also was like just deeply like frustrated by the time I was in like elementary school, and I had like sort of outgrown, like as far as like mental acuity, my parents in a lot of ways. Like I had matured beyond them. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be a very long stretch of time that we're all stuck together. Like life is going to be very long if we're all doing this together. And so for me to be able to have like new perspective, like it regenerated my affection for them, my compassion towards them, my strategy with them. Like I learned things, and throughout the course of like just learning about trauma, like how to de-escalate, people and I'm not perfect at it. My goodness gracious, I'm not. I suck at it. So, but I understand like what is required, and understanding like what's going on behind a person's eyes, and having a sense of like why they're doing what they're doing, and how you handle conflict, how you de-escalate things, all that kind of stuff. And I do those things with my parents.
Wow.
Now they don't know it's what I'm doing, but like the same tactics I use on my 10-year-old son, I use on my 60-year-old father, and they are both effective because these are both people who have been crafted by their traumatic experiences. The difference is that my son has been fortunate to be placed in a home with parents who are mentally sound for the most part, who love the Lord, and who are trying our literal best to get it right. And there are lots of days where we screw it up, but we are trying and we are intentional. And like every day we're just like, oh, okay, let's try again. Let's try again, And so he has that, and he's learning how to cope. He's learning how to manage. He's learning how to regulate. There's new pathways being formed in his mind. I look at my dad, who did not have any sort of interventions. And so when you learn that like when trauma happens, if it doesn't go like untended to, oftentimes development is literally arrested in those places, in those times, in that space, that mental age, whatever, where that child or that person is undergoing those things. And so what you wind up having are like just generations of like grown-ups, just like older people who are essentially trapped in the minds of children because they stopped. They just like stopped developing. They stopped maturing. They stopped, acquiring skills. They just like stopped. And so I'm looking at my son and I'm looking at my dad, and I'm treating them both the same way. And I'm watching it work in both instances because this stuff is not like rocket science. It's just, well, it's kind of rocket science. It's still science, but like it works, And so, you asked about individual Christians, like, wouldn't we all be benefited by that?
Yeah.
To be able to like sit across the table from somebody and understand like, okay, this is where we're at. All right. So let me put on this hat, and I can be here present for this conversation in an appropriate way.
Yeah.
Man, that should be all of us.
Yeah, that is so good. And so hopefully there are listeners who are like starting to itch as they're hearing this of like, I want to get involved in foster care, or I want to be an adoptive parent at some point, somewhere in there. What are some on-ramps that they can start Googling, or people they can call? How do they step into that?
So I would say the best place to start really is just to like really start to educate yourself in the space, in like trauma's like the big thing. I would say start with that, because if what you're reading and learning is not jiving with like your capacity and your capabilities, and that, then like this might not be the space for you.
Yeah.
And like it's not an unkind thing to say that like this is not for everybody. It really isn't. The beauty of foster care and adoption, especially in like in the Christian church space, is that there's lots of ways to impact foster care and adoption without having to actually be a foster parent or be an adoptive parent. And so I think sometimes people think, well, I can't bring a child into my home like on a short-term basis, so I guess foster care is not for me. Well, it's foster parenting is not for everybody, but foster care I think certainly is. And so I would say start with trauma and just learning. There's a million resources out there. You don't have to look very far. I mean, just podcasts and YouTube videos. And the framework that we learned that we love is called TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Intervention. That's a great place to start when you're learning about trauma and how it impacts the body, but also like how relationship can literally configure a person's brain into wellness. So I would say, yes, 100% start with just like self-learning and being really, again, sort of hands open, hands off with the information that's out there. And then our experiences was, now mind you, we've been parents now for 4 years, and we jumped into like this space maybe a year, so 5 years. So it's been 5 years since we've actually like gone through our home study process and everything. But we were told very very lovingly by the DFACS rep that we talked to. She said, what you probably want to do is go through a private agency first. Or that's what you want to do, is go through a private agency, because all the CPAs, which are child placing agencies, they all work in conjunction with DFACS. DFACS is like the main guardian for all those children, so everybody goes through DFACS, but DFACS can't, take care of everybody. And so what they do is contract out to the CPAs to be able to manage the caseload. So if you go through a private CPA, you're likely to get a bit more like hand holding, which is really nice when you're going through like maybe one of the most traumatic things you'll ever go through. And so, but also like local DFACS and DCS offices are wonderful. And obviously their goal is to find more families and find more homes too. Because if these kids are able to be in stable placements for as long as they need, with parents who are like in it, not just for the children, but also for the biological family too, and are really availing themselves. So like, I want to support this whole family unit as they figure out how to blend back together in a healthy way, then that helps these kids to go home. And like, foster care is not meant to be like the final resting place for these children. It can't be. Like, we have kids that are consistently coming in, and we have foster parents that are emptying out, and like the numbers are just like they're trending in the wrong direction. And so it is to DFACS's best interest, to everyone's best interest. Like, they want more foster parents. So, you're obviously welcome to like reach out to your local DCS or DFACS and just ask them, like, just point blank. I don't even know if we asked. She was just like very straightforward with us, which I appreciated. And she's like, go call them, and then they'll call us. And so, but just to be open, I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is just to really be open, and to like the notion that like whatever you learn will not be enough. But the experiences of like, man, these kids are just like wild. Like, part of what Georgia Kids Belong does is we have a contract with the state, with DFACS, that allows us to take kids, every few months to like a location. We do these videos, and these are specifically waiting children who are like, I want an adoptive home. I want to be adopted, and I can't go home. So like, please, somebody see me. And so we take the kids out. We give them like a beautiful day. I know you got to experience it, and it's like, it's just the most phenomenal, life-changing, weird day. Like, because foster care can just seem so nebulous and scary, and in some ways it should feel a little bit like that, because if you go in and you're naive about it, like, right, that's why a lot of families are dropping out. They're just like, I thought my good intentions would save the day, and they just don't. And I'm saying that as somebody who like, I'm like stuck with my kids, like they're not going anywhere, and like my good intentions don't save the day, and so but you meet these kids, and like, it's just all the like theory goes out the window, like all the weird stereotypes or misconceived notions or whatever about like what a foster kid must be like, just goes out the window when you're like, oh, you're just like a child. Like, you're just a child, and you're just a teenager. You're just some kid, and like, you like the same things that I like, and you don't like things that I don't like. You're just human. Yeah. And like, I can make space for a human, I might not be able to make space for like, the kind of scary sort of stereotypical thing that we might see in a movie that's like, these like just grungy and mean or whatever. But like, I've not met any of those kids, and like, they just so badly want what every other kid wants. And they're not even asking for like pie in the sky things. Like, we're asking them like, what's like a yes day for you? If you could just craft like a perfect day. And if you were to ask a kid who's never gone through anything bad in their entire life, they might say the most ridiculous things, because like the sky feels like the limit to them.
Yeah.
But when you're a kid, the sky feels very low. There is a limit. And I don't get to ask for all the things that other kids get to ask for. They're asking for things like, oh my gosh, my perfect day would just be like, I come home from school and like we get to do like a game night. And somebody asks me how my day was. I would love that. And they're not even like trying to put on like a sad story in order to appeal to a certain, like that's just like truly what their heart wants. And it's like, I can make room in my life for that.
Yeah.
I can make room in my life for that. We made room in our life for 4. So I don't know if I would recommend that, but being naive in a holy way is also really helpful. And so, but yeah, like they're just kids, man. And they like, they want like the bare minimum out of this life. And it'll like break you, but like once you see a thing, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And so if you're feeling at all inclined towards any sort of involvement in like the foster care adoption space, I would caution you that like once those gates are opened, like and the water comes flushing through, you cannot close it again. And so I would caution you to only venture in if you're like ready for your eyes to be opened.
Yeah.
Knowing that they might never be shut again to the situation, and these kids are just like, they're languishing. Like they really are just languishing. These kids are aging out, 20, 30,000 kids every year aging out without being adopted, without being able to go home, without any sort of connections that can support them. And this whole thing is like a massive pipeline into all the other things that we love as a church to be involved in. We love talking about the homeless. We love talking about sex trafficking. We love talking about, addictions, and we love talking about all those things. But all those things have like an incredibly obvious foundation in foster care.
Yeah.
Because these kids are being funneled out. They have nothing. And so they're turning to all these different things. And so if you want to make a difference, foster care is where you go upriver.
Yeah.
And before we're having to figure out how to programmatically save people from, being from homelessness and from poverty and from, incarceration and from trafficking and all these different things, all these social wounds. And at that point, they're adults and they're hurt and they're beleaguered and they're just, and now you're dealing with an adult who has faculty and actually has somewhat control over their lives and are squandering it because they don't know how to make good decisions because they've been traumatized and they don't know how to cope. We go back upriver, and what do you have? You have 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds in foster care. And like, that's where you do the work.
Yeah.
That's where the work is. And if you can step into a cycle and get involved in this space and be present for these biological families that are oftentimes like all participants in those social wounds, so often are former foster kids themselves. So the cycles just keep continuing and keep continuing. We're perpetuating it over and over and over again. So if we can figure out how to mend these families, I look at my children and we recently were, my oldest is in 7th grade, and it's been super cool watching her like delve deeper into her walk with the Lord. And she's coming up with insights and revelations that weren't available to her when she was younger, just by virtue of being older. And recently she was talking about, like prior to coming into this home, I had like no concept of God at all and didn't have concepts for things like birthdays or Christmases or things like that. And she said, then I'm as I'm learning about God, it suddenly is opening up. I'm obviously paraphrasing, and she said it in a longer roundabout way, but she said, now that like my eyes are being opened, now I'm being forced to ask questions like, wait, so where was he? Like when all those things were happening, and like, why couldn't I go home? And why did he not like come to my rescue so I could be home with my parents? And she's wrestling with those kinds of things, which we're like super open to like all kinds of communication. And so, she's obviously very comfortable saying those things to us. And she's like, that's really hard for me to reconcile. And as I'm hearing her like, wrestle with this, and I'm like, yeah, that's hard. Like, I don't always have an answer for it. I truly don't. Some days. And so, but as I'm like, in the days that followed, like thinking through it, I was just thinking like, man, like the word that I felt like the Lord was giving me was that like almost like Moses in a basket having to be pulled out from his context in order to be able to come back into it and exact change.
Yeah.
You know, and I told my kids, like, because they know that story. They love The Prince of Egypt, as do all of us. It's like
so
the
good.
greatest movie that's ever been made in the history of cinema. You know, and so I was able to use that example and say, like, sometimes God has to pull people out in order to prepare them to be able to be reinserted back into it, you know?
Yeah.
And even if you're never able to, like, actually reunite with biological family, like, you don't know if anyone's praying for them. You don't know if anyone in that family, like, knows the Lord or it cares about things, you know, pertaining to Jesus, who cares about, you know, reconciliation, who are going to go to college or make things out of their life that are a bit more, like, obviously successful. And so maybe God, like, pulled you out and didn't let you go back in because he needed somebody who was going to care so strongly for that family to pray and, like, contend, and, like, no one's going to care more about your mom being saved than you.
Yeah.
So, like, that's your job now. So, like, that's like, and that's not like a heavy thing. It should be like, okay, I get to go to war for these people that I might never ever see again, knowing that maybe, like, it all makes sense in the end, you know? And so then once you enter into this space, like, you just can't unknow it.
Yeah.
And so I would just say, like, step in, like, so open-handed and, like, just, you know, as I don't know, without notions as you can.
Yeah.
And just be open to, like, what is there.
Yeah, that's good. And we're doing memorizing scripture and gratitude for our rhythms this month as a church. And so as we wrap up, do you have any thoughts on, oh, that's my phone. Sorry, guys. Any thoughts on memorizing scripture or gratitude that you would want to share with listeners today?
Gosh, I'm just very grateful for my family. I'm very grateful that God did not give us what we thought we wanted when we were thinking about a family. I'm very grateful that, you know, the things that we went through are not wasted, and it puts everything into context. And now I get to parent children, and, like, in a lot of ways, I'm almost parenting myself a little bit, you know, and giving my kids what I wish somebody would have given to me. And so I'm very thankful that, you know, that God is, like, present and doesn't waste anything, and, like, his plans are good and his gifts are good. And so we talk a lot about gratitude in my house. And, you know, I wouldn't say this as a blanket statement for all kids in foster care, because if you have an expectation that these kids are going to be grateful, I would lower your expectations, because sometimes that capacity to be grateful is, like, almost a privilege, you know? And so some of these kids will struggle with being grateful because their life has been so hard, and that's okay. But my kids are, like, hyper aware of what they have in comparison to what they didn't before. And, like, that is, like, that's a mainstay in our house, is being thankful. And, like, so I see my kids practicing gratitude all the time. And, like, it's been 4 years. I've never missed a meal at the table, and they're still just like, thank you so much every single day. Every meal I put before them. Thank you so much for this food. Thank you so much. Because, like, that wasn't always a given, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of gratitude in our home, and our kids are just like, they just don't take things for granted. And I'm very grateful. Like, I'm grateful for my family.
Yeah.
Super grateful. And memorizing scripture, it's funny. We actually started recently with our kids, especially, like, on Sundays when we can't make it, is, like, almost like practicing church at home. And it's been really funny. So we'll do, like, we actually did this past Sunday because we did, like, a thing the night before, and we were up super, super late with them. It was, like, the latest we'd ever kept our kids out before ever. And so it was, like, 11 o'clock at night, and they were like, whoa, the sky's so dark.
That's what this is like.
We look at the stars. Yeah. And so it has, like, never happened before. I don't know if it'll ever happen again, because they were very angry the next day. So we were doing church at home, and so we model it a lot after, like, Riverstone stuff. And so recently when we've been doing it, I tell the kids, like, everyone has to contribute. Everybody has to find a scripture. Everybody has to come up with a discussion question. Everybody has to answer. Everybody has to, you know. And Jamie and I decided we are not going to comment on, like, the accuracy of their interpretations or their thoughts about things, because I really want them to be able to practice, like, gaining confidence in their understanding of, like, having biblical literacy. And it's not always right, but, like, I want them to be able to, like, extract something and like what I feel like God's telling me, and like they're journaling about it, and they're you know, we spend some time in quiet just doing that, so they're like journaling and what I feel like God's telling me or whatever. And it's just like so funny because they'll just like, you know, and I'm not even telling them how to find this stuff. I'm like, ask God if he wants you to like talk about something, or just like flip open, I don't know, just like I want you to get accustomed to like opening your Bible. I want you to be able to say like, we're in Ephesians 5 and everybody has to find it, you know. And so Jamie and I are just like straight faced, trying not to like laugh at the absurdity of the things that they're saying. And my son always manages to pick out something like super Old Testament. He's like, and then she drove the tent spike into his face, into his, you know. And I'm just like, absolutely, what is God telling you about that? You know, yeah, and she did. But it's just really, really funny hearing children talk about scripture. Yeah. It's really funny. And like, I don't know, like, you know, my youngest this past Sunday, we were like, oh, but actually we are going to jump in on that one. We are going to go ahead and correct. Cause she was like, you know, she was reading like Genesis 1:1, and she's like, I just think it's so great that like God did all this stuff and he made everything, he made us. But it's crazy that he commanded us. He said, there will be no sin. And then we all sinned. So it's almost like God he was wrong. And so not everything he says comes true. And we were like, you want to take this? Okay. So actually, we are gonna go ahead and tackle this one. Yeah. I don't want to like just leave that one festering for a while. But it is just really, really funny, like thinking through scripture with kids. Yeah. And hearing them, you know, quote it back or whatever. And awesome. We talk to them a lot about like, you have to be able to defend, you know. So if we talk about like other religions, or we talk about, you know, big hot button issues, we talk about everything. It's a super open household. Half the time the kids are just like totally naked. I don't know what's happening. It's just like, it's a free for all in our house. And so like we talk about everything, and we just like, you know, it's open everything, whatever. And so, but yeah, it's like really cool to be able to see them like, they're digesting these things. Yeah. And it's like, it's coming out of them. And this morning, my two oldest daughters, they're middle schoolers. I was just like overhearing, and my oldest daughter said, oh my gosh, what did she say? I miss that with all of my heart. And my second oldest goes, you're supposed to love God with all of your heart and all of your mind and all of your soul and all your strength. And Harper was like, I do love God with all my heart. I said, I miss that thing with all my heart. Those are very different things. And Virginia's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. So it's like, it's like it's super intense. Awesome. But it's just, yeah. So yeah, we're trying to build some like confidence in biblical literacy and stuff in our house. And it's slow going for sure. But yeah, it's good stuff. My oldest daughter recently, she's the one, it's been really cool to watch her like develop a relationship with the Lord, because she's so, I think maybe in ways the other three aren't, like aware. She was also older when we met her. And so she's had more experiences than the other three. And so seeing her come to like an understanding about the Lord is really bittersweet, I would say, probably more aptly is bittersweet. But her like insights and her depths are really like, there's like still waters there that have been really interesting to watch. And so last year she started middle school, and she met a girl that as they got through the year and we're talking, I guess at some point somebody was vulnerable with the other one, and they had like really similar stories. And the girl was also in sort of like a foster care situation, like a fictive kin kind of thing. And Harper came home and she's like blown away, like, cause nobody ever has their experiences. They're isolated in every context that they're in, you know? And so she was like, oh my gosh, like we were just sharing stuff. I haven't been able to tell anybody, like any of my friends, blah, blah, blah. And so she said, I've been talking to her about Jesus, and like, I don't think I'm very good at it, but like I'm talking to her about him, and like, what do I say about this? And like, can you give me some handles for like how I can talk about that? And then, so she's having these conversations, and she's essentially like leading this girl to Jesus, and she doesn't know like formally what she's doing. But she comes home like the next week. She's like, how much money do I have in my piggy bank or whatever? Can I buy her a Bible? She doesn't have a Bible, so can I buy her one? And like, I want her to have the same one as me, so like I can, you know. And we were just like blown away, like, that's amazing, you know, from these kids who moved in and were just like, what is God? You know, to like now seeing them like, you're supposed to love God with all of your heart. And like, you know, and yeah, it's been really cool.
Wow.
Really cool.
Oh my gosh. Well, we love your family at Riverstone. Huge fans of you guys, and are so grateful that y'all are here. And then also so grateful that you are our first guest on the podcast.
Gosh, I had no idea, y'all. Wow.
Our hero.
What an honor.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being here. I'll go ahead and pray us out, and then we'll hopefully see you guys next week. But Father, we are just so grateful for Adriana and her whole family, for Georgia Kids Belong and the greater movements that you're allowing us to be a part of in this system in America. And we just ask that you would use us in whatever ways you want to reconcile families to one another and to you. And we ask, Lord, that you would ready our feet with the gospel of peace to go into the places that you're asking us to go. We ask, God, that you would call the people that you desire to be some of the major players in this, and that they would respond with ready obedience and willingness and joy, and that you would use the rest of us, Lord, to come around and support them and lift them up and carry one another's burdens. And God, we are just so grateful for your hope and your peace and the family that you've brought us into. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All
Thank you
right.
for having me.
Absolutely. We'll see y'all next week.